Hello, my name is Jin-Hee Kim, and I am with the Aspen Institute. The act of giving back to your community can be an incredibly powerful and rewarding experience. Philanthropy as an act of giving has been utilized to shape communities for centuries, helping to affect our world as we know it today. Philanthropy can come in many forms and is both reflective of and contributes to changes in society. Technological advances, an erosion of trust in institutions, and increasing concentration of wealth power are all societal developments where philanthropy can have an important role to play. But what if societal changes cause shifts in traditional philanthropy models? Does the lens need to shift as well? To help explore and answer that question, please help me to welcome Senior Personal Finance Correspondent for CNBC, Sharon Epperson, and her esteemed panel.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here for this very important panel. The lens that we're looking through is the lens of philanthropy and the impact that it has on our society. And in the wake of what happened in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, there was renewed commitment to philanthropy and to social impact to achieve racial justice and racial equity. And there have been many changes since 2020 in terms of people's feelings about these issues and about how they are executed, or in some cases, perhaps not. And so what I'm excited to do today is talk about what some of the opportunities are still and what some of the challenges are as well, and come up with some solutions perhaps to give to you of ways to go forward and navigating the headwinds of how to do this in terms of advancing social progress are three amazing leaders. First, we have Melissa Bradley, who is the founder and the managing partner of 1863 Ventures. That's a national business development nonprofit accelerator and a venture capital fund for new majority founders. Next to her is Jay Bailey. Jay Bailey is based in Atlanta. He is president and CEO of the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs, one of the largest centers that is developing, growing, and scaling businesses, helping Black entrepreneurs scale their businesses. And Delilah Wilson-Scott is the executive vice president and the chief diversity officer at Comcast Corporation. She's also the president of Comcast NBCUniversal Foundation. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. So I want us all to be able to start at and level set what we're talking about when we talk about philanthropy. I'm going to give you the definition that I found for it that says that it's defined as an effort that an individual or an organization undertakes based on an altruistic desire to improve human welfare. So I'm curious how each of you defines philanthropy, and then what the role of the funding and philanthropy for advancing programs and supporting organizations that are focused on racial equity and racial justice, what does that look like to you? So, Melissa, let me start with you. Philanthropy, how would you define that?
Sure. So first, let me acknowledge my Jesuit education of Georgetown University, where they got, see what I'm saying? That we are everywhere.
Everywhere.
You know? Everywhere.
Well, everywhere.
But I start there because we have the phrase cura personalis, care of the person. And I think that one of the many conversations I've had the privilege to have of finally being here for the first time without an agenda and just to be, thanks to Comcast, is that what was happening is this desire for us to be well, but understanding the need to support the commons, however you define that. And so as a finance person, I think of philanthropy as one dot on a long continuum of investment spectrum. You have dollars that we invest for 100% return, and maybe we care if there's a social return or not. You have dollars that we invest for 100% social impact that should be quantified with no expectation of financial return. So to me, philanthropy is nothing but a part of a capital stack that can be used to reimagine what does capitalism look like, so it actually takes care of people. And I think what's happened is that when we think about the world of finance, of risk and opportunity costs, we have used philanthropy to mitigate perceived risk and try to overcompensate for opportunity costs. But the reality is when we think about what's happening in philanthropy, we see that post-George Floyd, there's been a dramatic decline in that, particularly for people who look like me. And let me preface, I'm Black, I'm gay, and we are a Black Jewish family. Ain't nobody looking for me. And so, but I say that because what has happened is that when there has been this tide of anticlimactic social events, the perception has been, leave it to philanthropy. But McKinsey has said there is not enough money in philanthropy to solve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I think we have to have this conversation of philanthropy is one of many financial vehicles by which we can all support a thriving economy and wealth-building activities for the majority, including the new majority.
So philanthropy as capital.
Correct.
As capital, Jay, but people may say, you run a nonprofit, giving to your organization, it's charity. That's the word you love.
Oh, now you want to be okay, we're going there today.
We're going there.
Start spinning.
You chose violence. She knows that it's a touch point for me. I'll tell a little bit of a narrative.
Yes.
Here in 2018, it's an Aspen story. I came to Aspen with this big vision of what we could create as the Russell Center. But I also had done a feasibility study in my hometown that I wanted to create the world's largest center dedicated to scaling and developing black businesses. I didn't have any money, no employees, but I scraped up $60,000 to get a feasibility study on my vision. The philanthropic community, the foundations, the corporations, they gave me honest feedback because it's anonymous. And I wanted to build black businesses because all of the data to support it. In Atlanta, Georgia, with a 52% black population, and only 8% of our businesses were adding to the economic growth, it was the only thing that made sense. Jay, how about you focus on GED training and early workforce development? Jay, how about you sell the building and just donate the money to charities on the west side that are already doing good work in that community? Jay, I see your 5-year pro forma. If you make that building too nice, the demographic that you're trying to serve will not feel comfortable in it. Why don't you just sell the building? There are not 100 black entrepreneurs in Atlanta that would benefit from a program like this. And we don't think if you only focus on black entrepreneurs, you'll be able to raise more than $2 million. Well, 3.5 years later, $70 million later, I say this.
All right now.
That I'll tell you what philanthropy is not. It is not charity. And I think you can never accomplish empowerment by seeing philanthropy through a charity lens. And I think you gave a brilliant definition of, did we get that on tape? I hope so. Thank you, sir. We're going to use that one. But I think so often there's this very paternalistic nature of philanthropy, that those people down there, here are a few pennies to work with what you need to do, but there's this radical indifference to my life and their lives. So it inherently creates this incredible wall that accomplishes none of the goals that Melissa just talked about. It actually furthers the separation. And so, you know, I know we'll dig into further questions before we get deeper into the constructs of why that is, but philanthropy is not charity. And I think these programs that increase the well-being, the prosperity, the economic mobility of our towns and our cities and our country cannot be seen through those lenses.
Yeah. When you are sitting with C-suite executives at Comcast, Delilah, and you say that you want to have, there's an altruistic desire to improve certain organizations, small businesses, how does that go over? How do you define philanthropy in the corporate lens?
I mean, just a couple of comments, though, of what has already been said. They gave you definitions and examples of what constitutes good and smart philanthropy. There is philanthropy that is charity. There is philanthropy that is ineffective. There is philanthropy where the funder is abusing the power dynamic, and there's a lack of trust. So that is not good philanthropy, so just so we're clear. But bad philanthropy exists at scale. But from a corporate perspective, a couple things. So one, employee voice is so significant for so many companies. We know that over 80% of employees want to see their CEOs invested in social issues and want to see actions behind that, right? So what was a nice to have, however many decades ago, is an absolute must-have for most employees. And right, there was a time when employees, investors, and shareholders were not asking that question. The second piece of that, though, I think for a company, if you're talking about good strategy, something that's going to be sustained, something a company is going to be involved in well beyond leadership changes, board changes, it's got to be something that's intrinsically connected to what that company was built for. What's the purpose of that company? What expertise do you bring to the table? What are you willing to put on the table beyond financial resources for philanthropy? So to Melissa's point, philanthropic capital is some good risk capital, but it does not work well alone. So for us, we think about the financial investments we make in companies and grants, but we also think about what else can we bring to the table, whether it's the power of our media platform or how we think about broadband and technology, how our talent shows up, everything from board service mentorship to helping us think differently about some of the ideas. So first is getting the issue right. When I'm talking about digital equity and how critical that is for economic mobility, that's an issue that all leaders get. When we talk about what our company is great at and what we're willing to put on the table to make our communities better, that's when it gets into the specifics. And the last piece I'll add is just proximity. I mean, I've known Melissa and Jay through a variety of different roles. These are excellent leaders, and they're honest. We can have honest, we're all straight shooters, which is like good and bad. So this conversation could go all over today. But that type of trust, like, makes me better. Yeah. Makes our philanthropy better, makes our portfolio better. When you're talking to either of them, they're not just thinking about their individual entity, they're thinking about how can we uplift the entire community. And that's the type of partnership that works for us.
So partnerships are key, and looking at the amount of money that has gone into philanthropic funding, specifically in the area of racial justice, racial equity, in the last several years. Looking at the Council Foundations report in 2023, the funding for racial equity jumped to $4.2 billion in 2020. That's considering the fact that between 2012 and 2019, altogether, it was only $3.3 billion. So a significant amount of money committed. But how have those investments delivered, Delilah? What has happened there?
So, I mean, let's just think about 2020.
Oh, no, here we're going to go.
We've had a
already
conversation
laughing. We'll get to you in a minute, Melissa.
Sorry. For those who do want to see us at the bar, we are having a reception at the rooftop. So there's
That's the real panel.
Yeah, exactly. That might be a slightly different conversation. I think, so that was a global event. When George Floyd was killed, it was a global event, and it raised awareness, just like, think of any urgent crises, but that was the first time it was happening at the global scale, and people questioned, right? They stood back, reflected on what can I do, what have I done, how was I allowing this to happen, right? There's that urgency and guilt for some that people feel, but there was definitely a lot of action taken. And people wanted to ask questions that they weren't asking before. People question, even though you have a longstanding commitment to DEI, I think that moment made us all think, what more could I be doing? And I think that's important. I would say those questions are still being asked more today than they were before 2020. But I think like any crisis, what happens is you have the people who are going to do the immediate response and relief work. And then and they fall off 2 to 3 years for any crisis. Katrina, 9/11, George Floyd. And so that's also happening in addition to just the anti-DEI backlash, so we're clear. But I also think, when I think about the investments we made, whether it's, in Melissa's entities or Jay's Hidden Genius Project, we've been able to move the needle forward, working on communities as it relates to digital equity. We have a $1 billion commitment to digital equity. We want people to understand that's not just about connectivity. It's about creating that access to the resources and making it possible for people to reach economic mobility. So I think that's important. But there's definitely backlash and a drop in activity. So that's clear. And I know we'll get into some of the legal issues as well, but I feel proud of the work we've done with a number of different partners that we're continued and committed to continuing. And I think that's what's important.
Melissa, before we get to the legal challenges, tell me what actually worked from what people did in 2020. Was there measurable success? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think if you use the definition Delilah just gave in terms of philanthropy as a response mechanism to a tragedy, it was successful. But the problem is the tragedy did not go away. And the tragedy didn't just happen in 2020. Correct. And so the amount of dollars that were put in did not eradicate the expense, the lost dollars of historical racism. Right? In fact, excuse me, as a professor of Georgetown, we just did some work that said that if we had listened and read and then followed through on the 1968 Kerner Commission report, that instead of having a deficit right now, and we had invested in black founders, we would have a $4 trillion surplus. That says to me that in your issue of trust, people are using philanthropy for me as a way to continue to stem the tide of those who have and those who don't, because it is very hierarchical, and you're not allowing me to make my own decisions. And so I think what was helpful in the moment, but not now, is that dollars were earmarked for very specific things that had historically been overlooked, and there was no thought around how does this work continue, nor was there any allyship with other investors to say, I started it, let me pass the baton to you. And with respect to the legal challenge, now it's just gotten worse, that at the beginning, all of us in this room are willing to let America crumble on the back of racism, and now we're trying to legally mandate it. Again, very differently.
Very differently, very differently. Over the last 4 years, Jay, in terms of the growth at the Russell Center, how consistent has it been? And I guess, what are you seeing right now in terms of funders and the partnerships that you've developed? Because you've developed a significant number.
I say to everybody, it's a time for courage. We are looking at a time, to Melissa's point, and certainly what you said, Delilah, anybody that's in the room that runs a balance sheet or ever has hired employees, run a business, or managed a budget, when you're facing something where all of the economists, all of the consultants, all of the analysts, all of the data, and all of the numbers say this is a good thing, it is productive, it will make you money, it makes us stronger, and you still choose to go that way. Now you're not talking about a logical argument. Now you're not talking about rational debate. Now you're talking about what I believe, and we'll probably get into it very specifically, because we can't have a conversation about race and how it impacts this. I think we're being intellectually disingenuous in our approach to really try to move the needle. And so when we start talking about the partners that we approach, I make the business case for our alignment. Let us not look at it as a social construct that we're trying to solve for, but X bank or X corporation, you sell this in this community. Because make no mistake, everybody in the room, Coca-Cola talks a lot about DEI because they know that Africa is their number one market. They know in the Southeast, black people drink more Coke than anybody else. So I guarantee in those boardrooms, when they're talking about profit margin, they're talking about diversity, inclusion. They're talking about all of these things. Right. Show me a D1 institution in the SEC that doesn't have an incredible DEI platform. Right. Student population, 4% black. Football team, 98% black. Right. So our approach is, look, X corporation, if you're looking at market adoption, if you're looking about getting in front of a demographic, if you're looking at customer adoption, if you're looking at brand, if you're looking at all of these things that make sense and talk to your bottom line, take me out of the foundation conversation and let's talk about how we impact your bottom line, and let's start the conversation there.
But what about the concern? Let me ask this. What about, let's get to the legal challenges. What about the concern of, I want to do that, that makes sense to me, but I'm looking at what happened to the Fearless Fund. I'm looking at the decision that said that the granting to black female-owned businesses was illegal because you're using race. And so therefore, I'm afraid to do what we've been doing in the partnerships that we've had.
So, I'm sorry.
I just want to make the distinction.
Take her off the leash. Let's go.
No.
On the cases.
Because, I just want to speak to the case because because you were the only maybe who read the whole damn thing. But this is what happens in the news cycle. We get the snippet. Yep. If anybody read the legal brief, we should, two things. We should know that there was a case against Hello Alice, a white-led firm that was doing the exact same thing, and Fearless Fund, a black-led organization. What the judge came back with, it wasn't that you cannot give to black people, but that is the convenient narrative. It said that you cannot make a contribution with a condition.
Because that's now a business contract.
Exactly.
Which you cannot use race as a factor.
That's right. So in Hello Alice, anybody can apply, but it's very clear the program is for black women or veterans or that, but anybody can apply. In the Fearless case, because of their majority white-led funder who wanted to make sure they got their DEI credit, they said the application had to check a box of black and then you could continue. If you did not check black, you could not continue. Makes sense. That's not fair. So we have to understand that the Fearless Fund is being put up as if they did it.
Right.
They did not do it on their own. I know them well. But it also didn't say that you can't give to black people.
But you can't have the condition.
But you cannot have the condition.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
Here's the jump in. Thank you for that, Melissa, to give them context. I had a very wealthy, very, very, very wealthy businessman in Atlanta give me a personal cell phone call. He's a Jewish man, and he said, Jay, help me understand this. The way that I am reading this, they are getting hit over the head because private dollars were given to give to a particular people for their forward mobility. And that troubles me. Because I've seen many an application where the requisite is that you're Jewish. And you got to check the box. That you're Latino. You got to check the box. That you're LGBTQ plus. You got to check the box. And when we talk about the anti-blackness and what I consider pure evil, black women at this point get less than what, 0.22% of all venture capital? Yeah. And you still want to take that? Crush that? And literally because there's a box that has existed for other populations across the board. And you're talking about private dollars mostly. It is a very scary precedent that we're setting. And what I'm saying to everybody in this audience is I look from, folks that work with folks with disabilities. I see Jewish people in the room. I see Latinos in the room. Like how we identify and we have these, these boxes that we're able to check to support the need that exists. This is not just about the Fearless Fund. It's not just about the box that was checked. And if we think that that is only it, we're being extremely naive.
Correct. Yeah.
But let's definitely clap for that. Just, to be practical about this, from where Melissa started, first, we all need to read the legal briefs. We shouldn't take any one answer from one lawyer or something somebody read to say this is now illegal, so we can't do it as the end game, right? So we should be up to date on the specifics that are relevant in your state about what's illegal and legal. The other thing is, I think, especially for anybody, but you can de-risk but not de-emphasize the work. So we wouldn't be great stewards of financial resources if we weren't always thinking about risk. This is now a new risk, right? People file frivolous lawsuits all the time. You got to think about what is your risk for litigation? How do you think about this from a reputation perspective? But you definitely want to know the legal aspects, and setting up your philanthropy to benefit a certain community from a grant perspective is not illegal. It does not mean that there won't be some litigation risk or some conversation about it. But I think in terms of when people are asking that question, you have to be able to respond or push back if you're hearing something that wasn't relevant in the brief. I talked to.
And is that in terms of as you're talking to people, you're thinking about how you develop and grow the strategy, how you change the language that you're using in your marketing in terms of
all of those things, but also just how you have a conversation at your, right? If you're working in corporate philanthropy, are you just taking, here's a list of things we're not doing anymore and not asking why? We should be having that conversation and understanding what decisions are being made, but the answer to everything is it's not illegal. The other thing I'll say is we know in this past year, Gravity Research put this out, about 60% of companies are now using what's considered to be more neutral language. So belonging, diverse perspectives, not saying DEI or equity, you name it. But at the end of the day, in 2024, another survey, 91% of executives are still behind it and 60% are continuing to do the work. So I think it depends and want to expand it. So I think, within your construct, you have to decide what you're willing to fight for, what you're willing to challenge, and were you really in it if this work is not for people who are like, oh, we can't do that. All right, this is not the space to be in if you're not willing to challenge that.
Right. So we're talking about race and philanthropy, but Melissa, how much do we need to rethink philanthropy in terms of risk? This is an investment. Correct. This is a financial decision.
Correct.
And can we, not that we want to remove race completely, because that's what we're talking about, but it's really about risk, and any investment that you're making, any portfolio that you have, it needs to be a diverse portfolio with risk,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
To grow.
Yes, and I think that I want to say that one of the challenges within the nonprofit sector is the lack of rigor around evaluation and metrics to be able to quantify the return.
Yes.
So we have to own that as a social sector. At Agency 3, we have taken less than $10 million and generated over $500 million in new wealth for our founders and their communities. It was a risk. Could have been $1 million, could have been whatever. But I just came out of a panel about art, and I think people invest in art. And you could buy a piece and nothing could ever happen to it. Person could die, maybe it makes money, maybe it doesn't. And so I think it really speaks to an individual institutional's risk tolerance. We make this investment decisions every single day. Some of us who are not part of the Aspen Circle made an investment decision to come here, and we believed that there was going to be an ROI, even if it was non-financial. And so I think we have to be careful of how we decide how do we use our time, our talents, and our treasures to make and have impact. And so I think, but I want to also then just build on what was said, but I think what's happening in the nonprofit or the philanthropic sector is that recognizing that by stepping away from this hard conversation around supporting a very specific group, that Cheryl Eifel was very clear did not have full access to democracy until 1954.
Or 65, if you continue.
That's right. I was trying to give America a little more credit, but I went back to 54. I think that philanthropy has not had those hard conversations, and so I think there has been an intentionality in the pursuit of doing good from a moral imperative, but they have not understood their role in the economic imperative. So to say that you're not going to invest in the community and just have us continue a deficit just seems absolutely absurd to me. Yep. To also then say, well, I'm going to dilute and say, well, I'm not going to talk about black, when we have to be clear, all the legal things that are happening, all of the manifestations and maturations, that's not about racism. Jay said it, it's about anti-blackness. These suits that are happening are not against anybody else but black people. And I find this very challenging, but not surprising, because we have been viewed historically as a commodity. We stood up this country. Slaves were the asset that underwrote the balance sheet of almost every single financial institution in this country. How dare you? How dare you tell me that my value is only good if it works for you? But I am not allowed to derive the ROI of my own value.
Yeah. What I find, okay. Yes, Jay. But now it's on you, because in your center, every vendor, listen, every vendor, everyone who works with you and who you are developing and helping to grow and scale their business is black. Is black. Yeah. And you're not changing that.
No.
So how are you going to go forward in light of the legal conditions that we're in, and in light of the anti-DEI backlash that is saying, no, it's MEI. It's merit, excellence, intelligence, not DEI.
You chose violence today. This is my pain points, which you know very well. There's another story. A very prominent CEO who made $1 million investment in our work. He called me a couple of days after news broke about the Fearless Fund. Cell phone call again. Jay, what do you think we should be thinking here? What do you think we should do here? And I simply told him, check or wire. He said, well, what does that mean? I said, do you want me to send your money back by check or by wire? The discussions that we had that led to that $1 million conversation have not changed. The environment in which we're trying to change the dynamic and not just beat the odds, but change the odds, has not changed. So because of this news flash, you're considering pulling back. You're not the kind of partner that I need to do this work.
That's right.
And I'm going to tell you definitively, this is the hill that I will die on. And you have to have that same level of courage. Yeah. And so when we think about our positioning. I'm a firm believer that you become what you behold.
Yes.
Anybody pull out their Google and say, type in successful businessman. I guarantee nothing's going to pop back that looks like me. So part of it is strategy, but the other part is fierce intentionality. That literally our entrepreneurs, we cannot just talk about informative curriculum because it's informative, it's not transformative. If we ignore the isolation, the depression, the loneliness, the self-esteem, the self-confidence, the belief that it requires to undergird, to see a business flourish, we lose. So yes, my chief experience officer wears her hair just like that, and she's proud. But she went to Dartmouth and Wharton, and she's a badass. The watch I'm wearing, the shirt I'm wearing, if you ever visit the Russell Center, the water we drink, our snacks, the AV, the low voltage, our plant guy, architect, general contractor, we spend more with black businesses than most Fortune 1000 companies, and we're a 4.5-year-old nonprofit organization. But that fierce intentionality sends a signal to the community that we are all in.
Yeah.
And if you are black, brown, or a woman in this room, white guys, I'm not talking to you right now. You have heard it your whole life. You got to be twice as sharp, 3 times as perfect, 5 times as on point, and many times just to compete with mediocre. That gets exhausting. And could we create one place on the planet where you could be vulnerable enough to say, I need help, where you could see value in your own reflection, where you didn't have to be perfect all the time, because we all know that if you cannot be vulnerable, you cannot learn. So that female executive does not raise their hand for help because they know if I F this up, there may never be another woman C-suite in this position or this bank ever again. So guess what? I'm just going to stumble in the darkness. So we had to create a space where you don't have to whisper black, that you don't have to do like this, that you don't have to say minorities or water it down to just make white people feel uncomfortable, because we've never had that kind of dynamic at scale.
Yeah.
And so it was so intentional, and the hardest battles that I fought because we were black before George Floyd.
Yes. Yep.
And everyone told us it would not work, it was not necessary, it was not needed, and it made 0 sense.
Yeah.
The biggest battles were to say that this is needed then, and to what you said, Melissa, it ain't like that knee was on our neck just in 2020.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
That knee has been on our neck since we got here.
But it is a great opportunity that you've taken, Jay, and really run with. But it's also a luxury that a corporate executive running a foundation may not have. That fierce intentionality that Delilah may have as a person, how does that play out when you're working for a corporation and there are shareholders, there are stakeholders, there are staff and executives? How do you make that work in this environment?
I mean, I think, a couple different things, because let's just talk about the return for a second, especially in the entrepreneurship space. If I'm a funder and I have $100,000 and I can choose between a grant and investment capital, and when it comes to black small businesses, I'm choosing the grant capital because I don't think they're worthy of an investment, or I don't think there's a return on the other side of that, and there's no other stat capital going with that. That is charity. So that's bad philanthropy. I think in the corporate philanthropy space, there are a number of different metrics you're thinking about. And you have to think about, if I'm going to support entities that are supporting entrepreneurs, I need to be able to describe the economic value, right? And that the inherent value and how we're helping them get there. I mean, business terms are important. Sometimes you can talk to the savviest business executives, and what motivates them on the philanthropic side doesn't tie. Right? So, they wouldn't let you manage their investment portfolio, but they have lots of ideas about what good philanthropy looks like, even though they've never studied it. So I do think there is, right, if you're doing it well, you're talking about the return, you're able to describe the benefits to the business. And if you have chosen the right issue and you're, again, coupling those financial resources with the assets of the company in an intentional way, it should feel consistent with the values and the purpose of the company. If it doesn't, yes, you're going to have that issue.
Right.
And if you feel like you're doing something that's consistent and you're still getting backlash, you need to understand why, right? Somebody wasn't invested before 2020, they were invested for a little bit, and now they're out of the game. That may not be a situation you can fix.
Right.
So you have to decide what type of challenge you're up for. But this is not the first challenge that philanthropy to support Black communities has ever faced. It will not be the last challenge. I think philanthropy does need to evolve. And more philanthropy is not always the answer. It's better philanthropy coupled with other resources.
Amen.
Does better philanthropy include a greater focus on the network that you're working with, on the helping people understand the importance of social capital and how that translates to financial capital, and the importance of diversifying the portfolio of what you're supporting? How much does that play into the discussions that you have?
I mean, I do think it makes a better funder, right? So if strategies get built in a vacuum with people who think like you, look like you, and then you're just going to drop it out there and expect everybody to come in on that, that's not really good. That's not really a good building process at the end of the day. So I do think that you have to be willing to learn as a fund. There is no funder who has all answers to anything. Some of them don't even have answers on the issues that they're trying to invest in. But what you shouldn't be doing is imposing any solution without talking to people who are actually impacted by it. So I do think proximity, thinking about how vast and diverse your network is always going to end up in a better result, whether it's financial results as a company, whether it's your philanthropy. And we just always have to check ourselves. Are we always just, hanging with the people that think like us? Or are we actually trying to have some challenging conversations and get to know the other side? I can't challenge something I don't know. I can critique it, but I can't make it better.
Right.
Can I just say
You want-
something on
yes,
the data?
please. Yes.
When you think about, have anybody ever invested in a business? So, and you invested knowing, right, that almost 50% plus of all businesses fail within 5 years. It's a risk you're willing to take. But if you look at the data, Black and brown businesses last at least 8.5 years. Don't get too excited, because that resilience does not correlate with access to capital or increased revenue, which says we are some resilient mofos. And we can turn a penny into $1,000.
Yep.
But the fact that people now are investing less in Black founders than they were post-George Floyd says the fundamental problem is not us. It's this construct that we have around what has the capacity to produce value.
Right, producing value. Listen, I know that we can talk amongst ourselves about this all day, and we will later, as she mentioned, in another location. But you all have questions.
5:30.
I know you have questions. I would love to hear your questions, not comments, but questions. Please,
Nice.
please identify yourself
7-part
and your connection as well.
Shut it down.
With City of Los Angeles, but I've been in philanthropy before. And this is more to the comment on the spectrum of many investments, and philanthropy is just part of it. This year, the debate is tonight, right?
Yeah.
For the presidential election, corporate tax rates are a key issue.
Yep.
And I guess my question is, what role do corporate tax rates have in bringing benefits to the very communities that we're talking about today, right? And is the loss of that corporate tax rate over the years why we can't seem to have enough money to invest in these historically disinvested communities?
Yeah.
Right? Because the one thing I wanted to mention amongst entrepreneurs here today is that our economy is very extractive.
Yep.
It's the same economy that created slavery, but it continues to be extractive. So it's normal for it not to invest in our communities. It wants to extract from our communities.
It's built on the extraction, right? I mean, I think I had the privilege to be the CEO of Tides, and we are over $1 billion assets under management. And so I think, yes, right, there is an opportunity for that tax implication to support. But one of the things I learned is that is, to Jay's point, only about intentionality, right? Because there is no correlation that says, if I give them back more money, they're going to invest in philanthropy. My fear is that means that Jamie Dimon would now make $1 billion a year in salary versus something else. And so I think, yes, it unlocks the capital, but without the intentionality of this is now money that has a larger risk aperture, it's unclear. And what's interesting, and if you're a bank in the room, I'm sorry, but what banks have historically been willing to do in the name of risking a penalty, of improper practices, redlining, greenlining, you name it, risking to then get a multi-billion-dollar fine and be like, oh well. And so I think we can think about the financial mechanisms that bring more capital. If there is not the intentionality and the values of how we place it, more money is not going to solve the problem.
Hallelujah.
Scared money is not good money.
Amen.
Another question? Oh, sorry, right here first, and then you, Laura.
Thank you so much for the comments. My name is Dr. Tim Lampkin. I'm from Clarksville, Mississippi. I run an organization called Higher Purpose Co. I'm also one of the Aspen Ideas Fellows, so excited to be here. My question is particularly around the need to shift philanthropy and corporate giving around supporting nonprofits and acquiring commercial property. We know that real estate development and the wealth that it has created is tremendous. And so can you speak to the opportunity around that and how that can be another wealth-building mechanism for organizations?
Thank you. Jay, that's all you.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this because I think it actually speaks to a larger problem. X Corporation, Jay, we want to give you $500,000, but you can't hire any staff. You can't use it for overhead. You can only use it within this time period. And we'd also like you to start a tree program.
Which is nowhere in your mission statement.
But I need that 500. It's my lifeblood. So when you start talking about real estate, back to what I was saying earlier about all the things that make sense on this side of the equation, how you could build community, how you could actually accelerate that impact that you're trying to have by placemaking is a well-researched phenomenon. But to your point, the conditions that you have for that money to acquire that commercial real estate are so restrictive and almost so damaging that it gives you maybe a 3 to 5 year window to take the capital in, to produce results. And if you don't, then it really comes back hard on you now because you now have a physical asset that you cannot maintain, service debt on, and there are all the implications that come from that, brother. I just think that there, be it from real estate or any type of use of philanthropy, it's a conversation about, does it need a reset? I think the question of the panel is a simple yes. We could have been here for 2 seconds. Does philanthropy need a reset? Yes. Dismissed. And I think, brother, we can
But it
talk
should still happen even if it's not imperfect.
Correct.
Right?
Oh,
We
absolutely.
should be
Absolutely.
trying to innovate, right? We should be thinking of the new ideas to make it better, knowing it's never going to be perfect.
Amen.
Yep. And many philanthropies have used real estate themselves. I mean, many of these large
Yes.
foundations have real estate because they understand the asset, but I think that's where it becomes who gets to make those decisions on who owns what assets.
Correct.
And it's more common in private foundation space and public dollars versus corporate, but those are also bigger dollars.
Exactly. Question. Yeah.
I'm Loretta McCarthy, and I run a company called Golden Seeds, and we
Yes.
invest only in women-led companies.
Thorough.
So
Thorough.
my question is, and this is a tinge of this was in some of your comments, I am really worried about the chilling effect of the lawsuits and the various pushbacks and rollbacks that are making many organizations kind of redefine their mission that they believe so strongly in and have for so long, but they're just sort of worn out, or they're just saying, if we just made these little modifications, maybe they won't come after us. And I'm just wondering what your tips are on that, because this isn't a time to get weak-kneed over all of this.
What's the action plan?
Why don't you start?
We were just talking a little bit about this. So, I want to be able to say there are organizations that are financially secure enough that they will not make those changes under any circumstances because they have a path to continuity, to success, to evolution, and they don't have to work within that funding landscape. But the truth is, most Black-led nonprofits don't have that privilege. So I think it is. I think it's a real conversation for the sector that we have to think about. And you have to remember state laws, too, especially for nonprofits that receive most of their dollars from public sources. They definitely have a different conversation and a different challenge to face. I don't know that there's an easy answer, right? Like most nonprofits couldn't hire a third-party counsel to even handle a suit.
Luckily,
no matter
Gibson
how.
and Dunn is representing any Black-led nonprofit in the grant or investment space for free.
Love it.
For free.
Write that down.
Like that.
Gibson done.
Now they're going to be so inundated.
Hey,
They're going to
Ron-
love
no
that.
doubt.
Ron Kirk.
Yeah, there's several foundation efforts
Yeah.
on that issue.
And I'm great at giving bad advice, so this may be bad advice, but I do think,
How do you know that?
well, we'll see.
Wife tells me.
No doubt. She does too, very much so. This is a fight. And as we approach July 4th and we celebrate liberty and freedom, it was only garnered by a fight. Things only change when we just said enough. And maybe the bloodshed and maybe they're not going that. I don't want y'all to turn into something else. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying this fight that we must have to stand on this hill, to say that we have the courage, and to your point, Delilah, a lot of my peers have changed their applications, have changed their mission statements, have changed their theory of change, have changed their methodology of change in fear of the possibility of someone perhaps knocking on their door. I just know that it is a time for some of us who can to dig in our heels and fight for those that can.
Yes. I would just add to that, I think, knowing that most people tend to operate in their own self-interest,
Yes.
I think we have to understand that while this is very much being around anti-Black, the ripple effect has impact when the same group of people sued the SBA around minority contracting, et cetera. That impacts white women just as much as Black people. And so I think we have to start saying, that's not a Black issue. This is, what is it that we all need to do together so that the preservation of access to capital, access to community, et cetera, still exists? Because my fear is that people are now saying, I'm just not going to mess with those Black people. But the reality is, you next. I mean, the sister back there from LA, she may be next, really, and then it's you. But like,
But it's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
One more question. Oh, right here. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Stacy Jacobson. I work at Alliance Bernstein, which is a money management firm. And my question for you, if you don't mind, I want to shift a little bit to the private foundations and personal giving. I work with our athletes and entertainers, and quite often they want to set up a private foundation just to have their name associated with it. But I so often try to encourage to align with an organization in which they truly has the same values and beliefs, because their dollars will go significantly further. You may be familiar with the Drew and Lauren Holiday and the work that they've done, and we've worked very closely with them, and we happen to find a very roundabout way to be able to support Black and brown businesses. So I think my question here is, for those who feel the need to have their name associated with philanthropic giving versus actually focusing on their dollars being better spent, what kind of advice do you have?
Melissa.
I would say start a DAF. And I say that because like, a lot of people don't do it, right? I think this idea of
So a donor advised fund.
donor advised fund, right? Because you minimize all that infrastructure having to have a foundation. But also what a DAF allows you to do is charitable money coming in, but then you can make a grant, you can make a loan, you can make an equity investment. So the freedom of that financial vehicle makes sense. I spent a lot of time with athletes.
As long as they do that, and they don't
Yes,
just have
as
the
long
money
as it's done
sit
in the name
there
of charity.
and the money manager's just keeping it to
Correct.
'cause-
Which I should say happens for places like Schwab, right? The reason they are where they are is because most people deposit their money and never come back.
And maybe I should clarify, because that is the type of work that we do, but I actually encourage them to align more closely, directly with an organization, maybe such as Jay's here, if that's exactly what they want to be doing. So
Then I said
not
that's,
using the DEF as a conduit.
that's an equation like exposure at that point. If they're a D1, I mean, like a professional athlete, you got to think about the journey of a professional athlete. Coming from the University of Georgia, you were so insulated from Pop Warner football through graduation and then the NFL, you don't have exposure. We take that for granted. I don't know what's out there. And one of the things we do well in Atlanta is making sure that those athletes, those entertainers, it's an incredible creative culture that we have in the city right now, that they know what's happening. Because if I don't know what's happening, I say, well, let me fix it. And I want my name attached to it. But I've never been to the Russell Center. And this is exactly what I want to invest in, but nobody ever told me about it, because all they told me to do was bounce the ball and shut up.
Yep. That's right.
But the strategies are different, Melissa, right? When you're talking about family office versus
Yes.
public versus private
That's right.
versus corporate.
Yes.
And so to your point, there does have to be a different strategy that you're thinking about there. Do we have another question? Time for one more? Yeah, right there.
Hi there, I'm Kristen from the Council on Foundations. Thanks for mentioning us in your opening. So we actually have filed an amicus brief in support of the Fearless Fund. for those of you who are interested in maintaining
A lot
support,
of people did, and you see
yeah,
what happened.
Yeah, along with many others. But for those of you who are grant makers and interested in maintaining your support to race-based, race-conscious giving, we actually have a lot of resources that you can access. But my question is, there has been a lot of conversation and discussion coming out of this about philanthropy stepping up and mobilizing a legal defense fund for the field to combat these attacks against nonprofits. And I wonder what your thoughts are on something like that.
I think that's a huge opportunity cost for organizations who can barely keep their doors open, pay for staff. No, just I think that makes y'all feel better. It don't do shit for our constituency.
But there are foundations who are making funds
Okay.
available for that purpose.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is
Yeah.
if philanthropy
We don't
were
need
to
any more
mobilize-
organizations. We don't need
Yeah.
any more vehicles. Because again, it creates an opportunity cost within those foundations are going to be able to go back and say, I'm helping black people by giving to the Legal Defense Fund, which is not my bottom line or Jay's bottom line, but some other probably white-led law firm that is going to be okay with or without it.
That's as hard as you can get.
So to the question before, so that you're saying, so then you're advocating for direct access, getting the
Let
capital
us
directly.
solve our own goddamn problems.
Get the direct capital directly to the organization.
And there are fights beyond the courtroom that need to happen, discussions beyond the courtroom that need to happen. We do need to have a legal strategy.
Right, absolutely.
But we need to be looking at all the platforms beyond the courtroom.
And the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I think what's happened with this lawsuit is become an intellectual discussion as if everything is well. Everything else is not well. And so now we want to mobilize money away from the core problem that black-led organizations are not supported. That's the problem. And so I would rather, instead of giving it to lawyers, say, how do I support the infrastructure so that organizations like ours and Ariane do not have to think about, do I need to change my mission statement? Do I need to let somebody go because we can't do black outreach anymore? That is systemic change. That fund, great. Wealthy going to be happy, they'll go home and they'll go to a cocktail party, but that's not going to fundamentally change the systemic racism that exists that will allow this to perpetuate unless people are willing to make bigger investments in those of us who are managing the solutions.
Exactly. So listen, I think we may have time for one more question. No, we don't have time for one more question. I'm sorry. Thank you, Joe. But this is what we learned. We could have ended this right away, right? We could have said, yes, philanthropy needs a course correction and goodbye, but we didn't. And what I'm hoping is you've heard some ideas here, but you have heard solutions that you can apply as a funder, as a grant maker, as a person working in a nonprofit, as a person trying to develop a foundation. And it's going to take this discussion continuing. So I'm hoping that wherever they say they're going to meet later, I'm not sure where that will be, that this will continue because you need to definitely, the partnerships that we've been talking about, the partnerships that are apparent here on this panel is how this is going to advance. Expanding the network, advancing the social capital to lead to the financial capital, and understanding there's a risk here, but the reward can be substantial. So thank you all very much for doing this.
Yes. Wait, but if you have to leave, but you gave us an assignment to come up with a list of solutions. So I'm going to share solutions that have come from Aspen sponsors and members.
Okay.
So one is allyship. Jane Fonda was pointing to say she gets arrested because if I get arrested, I'm going up under the jail. She gets arrested, it's going on TV. The woman next door, Joan Hoffman, started a book club. She had 10 white women and 10 black women, and they each had to take a book. And they had to come stylish, they had to be smart and ready to talk about the issues. And it's been transformative that this white woman got invited to a boulet in the Lynx thing. That's just crazy. The other thing that I would say is for those who actually want to use their money, don't write a check if you don't want to. But think about how you can leverage your balance sheet. If any of you who's a sponsor gave Jay and I 0.01% of your balance sheet as a loan loss reserve against the investments that we made, we could be transformative in the communities that we serve. And you ain't even had to write me a check. That's it. Sorry.
There you go, solutions.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.